Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to. Lots to talk about. Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy gave in and, well, has started an impeachment inquiry, which I got to tell you should be entertaining, should be interesting to see all of the backbiting Trump wannabes jockeying for their 7-second sound bites. That's going to be the part that I find interesting. And look, we'll see. We'll see what they come up with. They've got nothing, but we'll see where this takes us. And we'll talk about that. We'll get to some of that. I've got some thoughts later, but that's not my top story today. Top story today, Census Bureau. The Census Bureau today came out with some reporting that says poverty jumped to 12.4% in 2022, up from 7.8 in 2021. Poverty among children more than doubled. And you go, well, why'd that happen? Well, how? It's Joe Biden's fault. No, it's not Biden's fault. It's because we've got Republicans who demanded an end to the supplemental child tax credit. You know, that $250 a month for kids over 6 to $300 a month for kids under 6. You know, that stuff that was supposed to make sure that your kids didn't go hungry. And what we found we can end poverty. We can. We found it out. We figured out how to do it. You fund it. And we found out how to make poverty worse. You also couple that with with more Census Bureau bad news. U.S. Inflation-adjusted incomes in the U.S. have fallen for the third straight year. And we're impeaching Biden for who knows what. I know his kid had a laptop and is a degenerate. Maybe that's what it is. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about laptops. We'll probably see Hunter's junk again because that's the best they've got. But understand, the people who demanded an end to this meager program to help make sure that children don't go to bed hungry, these are people who thrive on desperation. They thrive on misery. And, I think back to, to George Carlin, who, again, the more you look at Carlin, and I was a huge Carlin fan as a kid, the more you look at what Carlin had to say over the years, go back to the 90s, he had hit the nail on the head when he said, look, the rich, they take all the money, they do none of the work. The middle class does all of the work, pays all of the taxes, and the poor are there to keep those middle class people showing up to those crummy jobs. And you go, that's reality. And I keep saying, and I've said this for a very long time, you have a Republican Party that hates working people. Clear, simple, to the point. They hate working people. Look at what they do. Not what they say, not, oh, how much we care. We love the children. We love the babies. Oh, we want to make sure babies are born. But what have you done to help feed them, to help clothe them, to help get them the health care, the education? What have you done? Oh, that's right, nothing. And my mind goes into these really angry places because for me, it's very simple. And it comes back to 8th grade civics class. The teacher going, look, at the end of the day, when I asked, which party do you find yourself? How do you figure this out? And they said, well, you think about it this way. It depends on where you are. Are you closer to being rich or closer to being poor? And I was actually poor at the time. I said, well, poor. He goes, well, then, Democrats, because they support programs to help feed the poor, which things that I benefited from. Or if you're, a Republican, you're for the very rich and tax breaks and, individual, hooray for me and the heck with everyone else. Then that's where you go. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you got to decide which you want to pay for, because you're going to pay for both. And that was the key in this, because I'm solidly in the middle, maybe a little bit upper of the middle. But I still think that we don't let children go to bed hungry. We don't let workers get screwed every time they turn around. And it's why I'm a union person, because I understand which side I'm on. I believe in hard work. I believe in jobs being the best anti-poverty program, which I've amended to union jobs being the best anti-poverty program. Yes, I believe in contracts for workers because I know when an employer falls on hard times, when things are a little touchy, it's going to be my kids are going to go hungry. It's going to be working people's kids who are going to go hungry. So when I saw this billionaire or this CEO, his name's Tim Gurner. He is the founder and CEO of the Gurner Group. He was given a little spiel, and this, now understand, we were talking about the Writers Guild strike not too long ago and said that, one of the executives is quoted saying the strike will go on as long as people are still in their homes. We want them to lose their mortgages, their apartments. We want them to suffer. We want them to struggle. We want pain. And look, that's every strike. That's not just unique to this one. But you don't know who that guy was. Well, our guy Tim Gurner here went and had while doing an interview on a panel, had the, well, I'm not going to say good sense, but went on to... I got to play the clip. I mean, you got to hear this for yourself. Here's Tim.
I think the problem that we've had is that we have people decided they didn't really want to work so much anymore through COVID, and that has had a massive issue on productivity. Tradies have definitely pulled back on productivity. They have been paid a lot to do not too much in the last few years. And we need to see that change. We need to see unemployment rise. Unemployment has to jump 40, 50% in my view. We need to see pain in the economy. We need to remind people that they work for the employer, not the other way around. I mean, there's been a systematic change where employees feel the employer is extremely lucky to have them, as opposed to the other way around. So it's a dynamic that has to change. We've got to kill that attitude, and that has to come through hurting the economy, which is what the whole global... the world is trying to do, the governments around the world are trying to increase unemployment to get that to some sort of normality. And we're seeing it. I think every employer now is seeing it. I mean, there is definitely massive layoffs going off. People might not be talking about it, but people are definitely laying people off, and we're starting to see less arrogance in the employment market, and that has to continue because that will cascade across the cost balance.
We've got to kill that attitude that workers value their lives and their time. We got to kill that because, you working people, you're not doing a lot, but you're expecting a lot. You've gotten got lazy. And I ask you, working folk, remember when you were essential? Remember when you were a frontline hero? Remember when you were doing your patriotic duty, going out there, making guys like this their profits? Remember when we were feeding the billionaires so they could stay home and stay safe? Yeah. Again, this is why I don't believe billionaires should exist. I think it's immoral. But again, this idea is not new. This is the old Jay Gould. I could pay half the working class to murder the other half. We just need to make working people desperate. And look, you've got a corporate-controlled media who's going to feed into this. So get ready for a lot of this messaging. Get ready for it. And we're seeing it. You're seeing it in all of the strike talk, especially the big stuff around, UPS, if you remember that. The Teamsters saying, look, we're going to go on strike. What did we hear about Sean O'Brien? Union boss. What are we hearing about Sean Fain over at the UAW? A democratically elected leader of a union. He's the union boss. He's not the boss. He's someone representing thousands of people and their interests. And what does the media never talk about? The massive profits that these workers put into the pockets of these corporations and these shareholders. And understand, and I keep saying this, Sean Fain did not pull the 46% increase in wages out of some back orifice. He pulled it right from the executive suite, because that's what the executives lined their pockets with over the last 4 years. So he's saying, look, if it's good enough for you, good enough for us. But understand our CEO mentality. You should be grateful. You should be happy to have a job. And look, this guy's, give him credit for at least being arrogant enough to come out and say it live. They are going to do everything they can do to cause pain across the economy, to put you working people back in your place. And the Republican Party is right there with them. Let me say that again. Our billionaire class wants you back in your place. Desperate, pliable, grateful to have a situation. Even if it doesn't make ends meet, even if you don't have the ability to save for your kids' college, even if you don't have the ability to save for your retirement, even if you don't get health care, you should be grateful because at least the scraps you're getting something. This kind of stuff should infuriate working people. And this is where I keep saying there is a divide. You've got to know which side you're on. And it's been a very long time in this country where you see a CEO coming out saying, look, we want it. We demand it. Globally, we have to get people back into line. You working people. Because their profits are sacrosanct. We have to make sure that they're well heeled. So when the belt tightening happens, it's going to be your belt, not theirs. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got lots to get to. Quick break, right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I find it interesting. George W. Bush back in the news. George was happy to find out that he survived because Yezhani Prigozhin, remember the guy who fell out of was a human lawn dart? The guy who tried to invade Russia with the Wagner Group and all that. Remember him? Yezhani Prigozhin, I guess his name is. Evidently, a picture has surfaced of him serving George W. Bush dinner. And W said, we kind of quipped of, well, all I know is I survived. Yeah, there you go. Now, what's interesting, what I do find interesting is Putin has weighed in on charges against Trump. He says, quote, what's happening with Trump is a persecution of a political rival for political motives. He says this shows the whole rottenness of the American political system, which cannot claim to teach others about democracy. And I got to tell you, I find it cute. I find it cute that a guy who throws his political opponents out of windows and crashes planes is lecturing us about holding people accountable. And in fact, he probably ordered a journalist defenestrated moments before he made the claim. And who knows? Maybe he's back to his, polonium-210 tea cocktail that he gave Alexander Litnikov. Yeah, that's fine. But Trump, no, it's too far. Let's quick go to the phones. We've got Steve in Chicago on line one. Steve, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. And just as an aside, I too find it interesting in terms of the murder of Prigozhin, because I often wonder who are the other people that were on that plane with him. I mean, if you find out that you're getting on a plane with Prigozhin, isn't that kind of like going to dinner with Jessica Fletcher for Murder, She Wrote?
Yeah.
I mean, wait, okay, I stand a 1 in chance 4 of dying here, so why would I get on this plane? But like I said, just as an aside. But yeah, it's an important topic. This attitude that this gentleman expressed, as you said, give him credit. This is what people actually think, but don't say. He actually said it.
Yep.
And the reality is, this is the same sort of thing that if you go back in time, this is what feudalism was. You're lucky that I let you farm my land, and you get to eat, and you get to live in a hovel, and what do you have to complain about? And when you study people who have acquired great wealth, either they're born into it or they somehow acquire acquired in the process of their life, they manage to convince themselves that they've earned it, that they're special. Even if they win the lottery, that they adopt this belief that, well, I was just meant to have this money. There must be something special about me.
I was chosen.
And especially, yeah, exactly, and especially within the framework of the Protestant ethic in this country that plays such a central role in defining, our work ethic and so forth. People actually believe that, that work and how much you make and so forth is part and parcel of the equation of whether or not you go to heaven and what kind of heaven you go to. So, this all is something that we've exploited in this society and this belief system. And obviously, there aren't enough super wealthy people in this country to make this a priority. So they have to, somehow make it so that average people vote their way. And it's been said by some, the problem with America, it makes everybody worry for the day that they're going to be rich. And this is how you get somebody who's working class, who's worried about, the fact that we might repeal the tax cuts for billionaires and people who make over $1 million. Why in heaven's name would you care? Because you're convinced that because when we poll people, a majority of people think that they're going to be in the top 10% in the next decade.
Yeah.
Now, that's obviously impossible. And if you're in the bottom 10% in this country, you have a 1 in 100 chance of moving into the top 10% in your life. So this idea that, you can just skyrocket yourself into that is ridiculous, let alone becoming part of the uber wealthy class.
Yeah.
And again, this is how you win elections, despite the fact that you represent interests that in no way, shape, or form are those that are shared by the vast majority of Americans. But instead you sell them on. They're trying to teach your kids trans stuff in school, and there's all of this stuff that's elevating African American history and the gay agenda, and you can go down a long list, and climate change. That's what you should worry about. Not whether or not there's going to be enough money in Social Security for you. Not whether or not there's going to be the fact that pensions have disappeared. What we're going to do with Medicare. No, don't worry about those things. Worry about whether or not there's some trans book in the library where your kid goes to school, because that's the big issue in your life.
No, and look, the reality is this is how you get to a point where, look at what's going on in Florida with the African American history courses. They benefited. It was actually a good thing. This is the billionaire mindset. Slavery was a good thing because they got skills. Steve, they got skills that they could use and made their lives better.
Yeah, as it's been said, before, rich people are different than the rest of us. They have money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and once you have money, I know we like to say, if money can't buy you happiness. That's true. Money can't buy you happiness. But all things being equal, it's a lot better to have a lot of money in this society than not. You have access to the best health care. You have access to the best food, the best housing, the best education. You don't have to worry about retirement. You don't have to worry about, your day-to-day obligations as far as your bills are concerned. Yeah, all things being equal, that's the case. And the reality is that, what exactly are we fighting for? I always believed that society had to progress over time, and that, after a certain number of generations that we were actually going to keep moving forward, and that, there might come a time when you have this perfect storm in which technology, along with advancements in the way that we think, our ideology has changed, that we don't value the almighty dollar as the be-all, end-all goal in life, and that there might be actually some shame in having too much. In the 19th century, when the robber barons had too much, a lot of them got the idea towards the end of their lives that, this is a bad idea. I don't look good in the press. I don't look good to the American people, so they decided to start giving it a lot of it away. And that's why you have Rockefeller Center and Carnegie this and blah, blah, blah. But with all due respect, it's nice that a lot of them gave that money away and to worthwhile causes, but it doesn't make up for the fact that they underpaid people, they exploited generations of people, they were responsible for the deaths of untold numbers of people in this country. So, you don't get to buy off America by giving a lot of your money away.
And they were tokens anyway.
Thought of that when you were making.
Exactly, but they were tokens anyway. It was nowhere near what they stole. And as I've said, behind every great billionaire, there's a great crime, and it usually starts with screwing their workers. Steve, I appreciate the call, though. Thanks, as always. Great stuff. Let's go to line 2. We've got Alice over on line 2. Alice, how are you?
Insane.
What's on your mind?
You'd be disappointed if I said I was sane, wouldn't you?
Well, it's predictable, and that's a good thing. So what are you insane about today?
Oh, well, a couple of things, actually. Number one, I just found it vastly amusing that Putin is repeating the Republicans, and then the Republicans turn around and repeat Putin.
Yeah.
And I thought, do you think that we're all stupid, that we can't realize that you all are exchanging info here and using the same propaganda?
It's a hoax, Alex. It's all a hoax, Alex. Alice, big hoax.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And then the second thing, I'm reading, in WAPO and listening to the news and whatnot, and, they're talking about the impeachment inquiry. And this just blew my mind. The specific thing that was said, that they're investigating to find out if Biden actually benefited from his son's business inquiry.
Right.
Not inquiries, but, business
dealings.
dealings.
So is that what they've settled on?
Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Did we not just have half the Trump family involved in the government? And don't tell me that Trump didn't benefit from, Ivanka in China and the boys in Saudi Arabia and, whatnot. And I thought, you know what? Okay. I think it's time that we start investigating these questionable activities that were going on by the Trump kids.
Yeah.
And
see, this impeachment will be different because Democrats will not back down, and I'm sure some of that will pop up. So we'll see. It should be fun and entertaining, if nothing else, because again, Republicans have shown us they've got nothing else.
Well, yeah, and considering you've got that James Comer, Jim Jordan, and then I forget what the other guy's name is, that are the three that's in charge, and I thought, oh, joy.
Let the fun begin. I appreciate the thoughts,
Have
Alice.
a good evening.
Thank you. No, this is, again, the reason I say this is this could be a major backfire. McCarthy has allowed the Kook caucus to take over. Didn't have a vote because he knows he doesn't have them, and let the moderates off the hook by not putting them on the record because he knew they would probably have to vote. Because understand, in California, there are 18 congressional districts that Biden won in 2020 where Republicans hold those seats. 18. If those 18, vote the wrong way, because these are fairly moderate districts, you could see a swing and Democrats could take the House just on this. And you got to think McCarthy knows that. But again, he's trying to hold on to his job because you've got the Matt Gaetzes of the world trying to throw him out. This is exactly what I said from the beginning. I hope McCarthy becomes speaker. I want him to have the headaches. I want him to have the acid reflux, all the stuff that comes with it. And let the fun begin. Also, Elon Musk Putin praised Elon Musk for being an outstanding person and a talented businessman. And I would assume thanked him for shutting off Starlink so that the Ukrainian military couldn't attack the Russian ships. Do you think Putin would allow a Musk to exist in Russia? Do you think? Or do you think Musk would find a window? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day the United Rubber Workers Union was founded in Akron, Ohio. Akron was the rubber capital of the world. All the major companies were there: Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, and General Tire. In Akron alone, there were more than 40,000 rubber workers and thousands more throughout the country. After 30 years of struggling to build the union, hopes of organizing the industry were finally made real. The founding of the International came after a successful strike the year before. But the union was born amid growing tensions within the AFL. These were the years of industrial organizing organizing that rivaled the exclusive skilled craft unions. Growing demands to organize the mass industries would explode the next month at the historic AFL convention in Atlantic City. The tensions between AFL leaders and rubber workers delegates gave a taste of things to come. At the founding convention, rubber workers delegates opposed a number of AFL leaders' demands. The AFL insisted on appointing officers. They threatened to withdraw financial assistance when the delegates demanded democratic elections. But AFL leaders backed off when unionists from across the city protested. Then, delegates voted down an AFL constitutional clause proposal to bar communists from the union. They also refused AFL orders to organize on anything less than a total industry basis. Organizing skilled workers into the United Rubber Workers became a contentious issue at the October AFL convention. It led to the fistfight between Carpenters leader Bill Hutchison and Mine Workers president John Lewis, which precipitated the AFL split. By the following spring, the new United Rubber Workers Union would lead another successful strike that put it firmly among the industrial unions of the CIO.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Back to school. Bright-eyed youngsters are now back in our public classrooms, filled with questions about the world around them. Questions like, what happened to our school library? And where did our librarians go? Sadly, these wholly beneficial, caring educators are being dumped in school trash bins by loopy right-wing ideologues who are out to impose their bigotry and ignorance on America. They've been on a rampage of banning books and demonizing teachers, but now the extremists are saying that's not stupid enough. Let's also launch a witch hunt against librarians. This authoritarian assault, funded by a clique of far-right billionaires and coordinated by their front groups, has been popping off across the country. But leave it to Texas Governor Greg Abbott to push it from extreme to totalitarianism. He has unilaterally seized control of Houston's school district, the largest, most diverse in Texas, installing his own whip-cracking dictatorial overseer. Mike Miles, a former Army Ranger and CEO of a corporate school chain, promptly decreed that to improve reading scores in his district, he would first eliminate librarians from 28 schools in Black and Latino neighborhoods and, second, turn their libraries into centers where students who misbehave will be disciplined. Also, Abbott's education czar demands that all teachers there must reapply for their jobs, agree to follow a centrally scripted curriculum, and be monitored by classroom cameras. Of course, elimination of independent educational resources and regimentation of instruction will reduce schools to state institutions for obedience training. This is Jim Hightower saying, and that's the point. The GOP's push to remake education is a billionaire's wet dream of a compliant, subservient workforce. Don't ask questions, just keep pulling that plow.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a Washington Post op-ed columnist, Catherine Rampal, she had an interesting take on the polling of the economy, and it's one of those things where you just go, I'm not quite sure, where she's at. Open for discussion, perhaps. Her take on why the polling's not higher on the Biden's economic policy. She opines Democrats' economic agenda hasn't caught on because of, quote, their myopic focus on manufacturing. She goes on to say maybe Americans don't feel like Bidenomics is working for them because it seems to be fixated on a sector that almost no Americans work in anymore, that doesn't feel relevant to their daily lives, and that isn't actually doing so great right now. Now, look, there's a couple of ways to look at that, bunch of ways to look at that, and that's why here to help me work through some of this, wade through, if you will. I've asked my good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, always great to be with you.
So what do you make of this? Is she right? Is she right in that we're so removed as a nation from manufacturing that we have no idea, or Is she saying what what the CEO at the beginning said? We're all just a bunch of lazy people who don't want to do any actual work.
Yeah, certainly not lazy people. People, I think most Americans I know are hardworking and want to earn their paycheck. But I'm happy to walk through what turned out to be a big old bucket of neoliberal bullpucky that she laid out there. It's like the 1990s woke up and not only wanted their music and fashion, but also their failed economic policies and to impose them on us, Rick, man. I don't even know where to start, but it was like, I think my jaw was dropped for the entire op-ed when I read that the first time, and how divorced from reality it was. The idea that, I mean, first of all, there's no sector of the economy where a majority of the people work, right? We have a diverse economy. Some people work in construction. Some people work in manufacturing. Some people work in the service sector, which is not a monolith, as you know. I mean, there's many different elements to that. Some people work in energy. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So the idea that because manufacturing is a distinct sector, and shouldn't get special treatment is kind of ridiculous. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why it could, and I'm happy to walk through those. But I mean, anybody in a factory town knows what that factory brings when it's working. It brings, guess what? Service jobs, and it brings construction jobs, and it brings all the other types of employment that she seems to care more about, but doesn't understand what kind of supports all of that kind of spin-off economic activity, number one. Number two, I think that she probably forgets how critical a role manufacturing plays in innovation, in national security, in research and development, in providing job opportunities for Americans who don't have a 4-year college degree. And does so in areas of the country that are urban, that are rural, and that are small towns.
And I would add to that, Scott. I would add one thing to what you said there. I would add identity. As we did our Working Class Heroes tour, the one thing that kept coming back to is we used to make stuff. And I go into Trenton, New Jersey every once in a while when I was driving a truck, was doing it all the time. And there's a bridge that goes into Trenton that's all lit up at night that says Trenton makes the world takes. Their commitment to manufacturing, because that's their identity. And I would argue that's a huge part of this that she's completely missed.
Yeah, absolutely. It is part of the identity. And she does say that, she thinks that Biden and Democrats are doing this to appeal to nostalgia and to try to win, white working class voters. Okay, that's her claim with all of this. I mean, the truth is, and you know this, that people in manufacturing are far more diverse than that. It's just not a bunch of white guys who, used to vote Democratic and are voting for Trump now. That's not what manufacturing looks like. But even beyond that, and this is the thing that gets me. It's like the policy's working. Yeah. I mean, this is what I don't understand. I mean, she talks about a manufacturing index, and this is very much reflective. This index of like what the Fed is doing on interest rates, or the fact that consumers, after buying a whole lot of manufactured products during the pandemic because they couldn't go anywhere, are finally going places, and they're buying fewer manufacturing goods right now than they had been. But I'm like, have you forgot all the semiconductor factories that are being constructed in America, or all the electric vehicle factories that are being constructed in America, or all the clean energy manufacturing facilities that are starting up in America, or the fact that manufacturing construction of new factories is basically at a level it hasn't been for a generation, or that we've seen very steady job growth in manufacturing, despite the fact that the sector is already very automated. It has a lot of robotics, but there's still a lot of people who work in it. And I'm just like, I don't know that reality persuades her. And I will just say this, that, we've tried to talk to her before because she's written basically the same thing over and over again. And she's just not interested in the argument. And so I'm like, I don't know where to start with folks like that, other than to push back, to present the facts as they are, rather than, again, some like, it's like, it's like maybe she was and not to pick on anybody, but like a Toad Wet Sprocket fan in the 90s, misses them along with neoliberal economics. I have a hard time figuring it out.
I'm with you because, when you look at the things that are going on, there's a reorganization going on. In fact, the newspaper of the investor class, the Wall Street Journal, now owned by the folks, that used to be their tagline. It used to, it was right on the front page, newspaper of the investor class. I'm not smart enough to make that up. They had an article, talking about, how, as trade is struggling, there's a reshuffling of the world economic cards, as their headline said. And they said, look, this is their words. The U.S. economy is chugging along while the rest of the world falls behind. We're doing, as you've said, we're doing better than the rest of the world. And they said, driving the division among the world's most powerful economies, a slowdown in trade that is hurting some much more than others. This is the stuff that we've been talking about: reshoring manufacturing, domestic production for domestic consumption, and this is the way that we take on China. It's enough. We've I hope given up on the idea of we're going to give our industries away in the hope that we're going to get cheap stuff back, because it hasn't worked. It's caused too much pain and misery.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That even, not that this, and I'm just going to say, to average Americans, how we're doing in comparison globally probably doesn't make a big difference, but it is an important data point, right? It's how you feel sitting around the kitchen table and how you feel in your community. But that is the truth, that our economy, relative to everybody else in the world, is doing pretty awesome right now. And, there's a lot of obstacles that we have. We have, Republican governance that may drive us off a fiscal cliff and certainly distract us. And we've had a lot of, climate-related issues that we've had to deal with. And we've had the Federal Reserve that is just, keeps hammering on the interest rates, which push up borrowing costs for a lot of folks. But despite all of that, we're doing well. Wages are rising faster than inflation. And, the jobs numbers look pretty good. And we are, again, we didn't used to make a whole lot of very important things like semiconductors. And we're going to be, once again, a global power in that in just a couple of years, thanks to these investments. So I just scratch my head and I'm like, what world is she looking at?
No, and again, it come back. It's the policy. I say sound investment, smart policy. We've been doing that, and that we're heading in the right direction. But understand, we're in a global situation where there's turmoil. And in fact, the Financial Times had a piece, saying that China is set to take over Japan as the world's largest car exporter. Where are they going to send those cars? Where are they going to export them to? Us. Which again, you have to have someone who's going to say, no, we're not. You're not going to be able to pump and dump. You're not going to be able to overproduce to stimulate your economy at the expense of ours. And thank goodness we got a guy in the White House who's saying that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I am deeply concerned about this. And I want to express how large this problem is. Okay. So, and first of all, the automotive sector is the heart of American manufacturing. It directly employs and then indirectly supports a ton of other jobs. And this, Rick, just being around the country, that, towns have auto parts factories, or they have tire and rubber factories, or glass factories, all supporting, or steel factories, aluminum, all supporting the automotive industry. So it's critically important to millions and millions of livelihoods in the United States. And the challenge is that China, again, has tons of automotive capacity. Their companies have been churning out millions of cars. And I saw one analyst's estimate that there are 25 million unsold cars in China alone. And just to put that in comparison, the number of cars actually bought in the United States every year, new cars, ranges from like 14 to 16 million. So you think about that, and that is a flood waiting to happen somewhere. But what that will mean is closed factories, lost jobs, and it would completely alter and disrupt the global automotive industry. And so, none of these should be coming to the United States. And if it takes tariffs to do that, that's what we need to do.
Yeah. No, but this is another part of the ongoing. Look, we're at war with China. I don't know if people get we're in an economic war. Yeah, absolutely, we've been in a trade war for years. This is coming, and look, our military is now shifting its focus. There was just a story in a publication over in Japan saying, look, you've got the U.S. Marines. They're shifting their focus to China as the real threat. This is part of what's unfortunately what's coming down the road, and we better prepare our manufacturing base for anything that may pop up, because I got to tell you, it's my view, a strong manufacturing base is a strong reason why maybe we don't get into a shooting war.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's the preventative aspect of all of this, Rick. And to be clear about the war, China for decades has been waging, I would argue, through its policies, economic warfare on other countries, including the United States. And unfortunately, they've been aided and abetted by our own trade policies for a long time and global companies. And they've added, and we have made, over the course of successive administrations, every overture to China to try to persuade China to change this behavior. And, Clinton tried to do it, and Bush tried to do it, and Obama tried to do it. And even Trump, despite the tariffs, he entered a trade deal with China, trying to get the phase one agreement, trying to do it. And Biden, they're sending cabinet secretaries over, right? Gina Raimondo was just there, the commerce secretary. And so it's not like we're trying to, we're trying to extend a hand, and every time, China's doing something to it. And so we do need to be prepared. And you're right. The best way to prevent a widespread conflict that would mean tens of thousands of casualties at a minimum, and also a global depression without a doubt, and serious harm done to America's interests in the Indo-Pacific region, including many, many allies, is to have a strong defense industrial base, strong manufacturing, and to show to China that we can project force in the Indo-Pacific, and that ultimately it's not going to be able to achieve its goal. It would be too costly. And to me, this is not saber rattling. This is actually preventing conflict. But we can't pretend like the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, are wanting to extend an olive branch to the United States of America and are harmless in all of this. This is not, unfortunately, the case. They have greater ambitions, and we need to make sure that we're prepared for to position ourselves to avoid conflict, but to do it through strength in the months and years to come, Rick.
No, and again, I go back to, maybe it's just the history I learned of World War II. The reason that we succeeded was, we had oil supplies, and we had a massive industrial base that could be turned over to war production. I've gone through manufacturing towns over the years, as you have recently as well, and what you see are hollowed out infrastructure. You see buildings crumbling. You don't see the manufacturing prowess that we once had. And fortunately, and I keep saying this is why I'm so high on Biden's policies. We're moving back to rebuilding, reshoring, and reorganizing that kind of manufacturing base. And I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, it's happening. It's out there. All you have to do is open your eyes and look around. And if you look on any jobs website, the number of manufacturers who are hiring is astounding. Every room I go to when I speak to manufacturers, I'm like, who's hiring? Everybody raises their hand. And there's never been a better time to look for a manufacturing job in this country. It's pretty great. But we got to keep the momentum up. We can't listen to people like Catherine Rampell. We can't let the Republicans roll back these investments. But on the same hand, we can't get rid of the tariffs that Trump put into place, that Biden has also in place, just because it's a policy that some other president did. We need to keep those as well as we move on.
I'm right there with you, Scott. As always, good stuff. Appreciate the time.
Of course, Rick. Great to be with you.
Thanks so much, our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out their website, AmericanManufacturing.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Good stuff. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Back after this.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. That was the day that Union Square in New York City was named a National Historic Landmark. Republican Governor George Pataki explained the importance of the park in a press release. It is only fitting that the National Park Service should recognize Union Square Park's long history as a focal point for political expression. New York is proud that the first Labor Day parade took place here in Union Square Park more than 100 years ago, establishing a tradition that spread across the nation. Although the park was very important to the labor movement, that was not why it was known as Union Square. The park got its name because it was the place of intersection or union of two busy New York roads, what are today Broadway and 4th Avenue. In 1831, the open space at the intersection was declared a public space. The space became an important location for labor rallies and political demonstrations. In 1882, the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history marched through the square, 10,000 workers waving their banners high. In 1911, union workers again gathered at Union Square to protest after the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire killed 146, mostly young women and girls, some garment workers as young as 11 and 14 years old. In the later 1920s, the park was demolished for construction of the New York subway, but the space continued to be important to the city's union movement. In 2002, a series of 22 bronze plaques were dedicated at the park to tell the history of Union Square. One of those plaques tells of the first Labor Day parade. Another is a collage of images of labor demonstrations and sheet music of labor songs. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Quote of the day from Christie. I'll say that right. Who names their kid Christie? Who does that? But anyway, our quote of the day from Chris Christie while he was at a stop in New Hampshire, claiming that Trump is hiding behind the walls of private clubs and the Secret Service protection. He says, you think I'm going to have a hard time finding Donald Trump? You think that over the course of the next couple of months, I'm not going to find him and confront him someplace? Chris says, I was a prosecutor for 7 years. It was my job to find people and confront them. Don't worry about it. I'll find him. Okay, going to do the Where's Waldo on the Trump thing. And the weird thing is if I'm Trump, I stay away from all of that. You don't want to get into one of those moments where you're being confronted. Are you surprised he's hiding? No, of course not. Now, what's interesting is the reporting that's coming out that actually Trump was privately discussing the impeachment with House GOP Conference Chair Elise Stefanik. That's kind of, well, now remember, she's the first member of the Republican leadership to come out in support of impeachment. So this is Trump thinking that this is going to help him. I think this is a miscalculation. I think this is going to make them look really bad because they're going to now have to put up or shut up. They've now got to come with something. And of course, we're going to hear about laptops and we're going to hear about, well, there was an email and we're going to hear all about that stuff. But there's going to be the other side of this. And what's interesting is you've now got an FBI agent who oversaw the investigation into Hunter Biden, now disputing the whistleblower. It's going to be all this stuff. And ultimately, there's going to be a lot of smoke. There's going to be a lot of mirror work. There's going to be a lot of sleight of hand. But I got to tell you, I'm not seeing the direct line. And while this is going on, you've got the Republican Party trying to purge itself of Donald Trump because you've got another Republican lawyer with ties to 3 former Trump opponents going, hey, we need to hold him off the ballot, disqualify him off of the ballot. Now, these are Republicans doing this because the Republicans don't want Trump either, because their thought is once people start seeing in these trials what the evidence actually is, it could change hearts and minds. It could potentially. Now, look, the most ardent red hats, never. The people, I don't care if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue and grabbed my wife by the you-know-what. I don't care. I still like him. That guy's never going to be movable. That guy's, well, he's down the road. But, people who don't pay an awful lot of attention, as this retribution impeachment happens, because, again, it's all about retribution. The Politico article today, House GOP weaponizes impeachment because there's nothing there. This could be the beginning of their downfall. And look, McCarthy didn't have a choice. They were going to, the Koch caucus was going to throw him to the curb, which, again, always fun. I love John Fetterman's response. He had another one, please go ahead. This one was, oh boy, go ahead. By all means, do your thing. Play your hand. And, for me, I keep coming back to where we started today. None of this is making the lives of working people better. The Republicans have no plans. Democrats are trying. There's some stuff out there. We're going to get to some of that here in a bit. But again, there's no agenda there. Now you got Trump running around saying, I'm going to cut more tax cuts. Oh, okay. For who? You think working people are going to get tax cuts out of Trump? You mean like the last tax cuts, Donald? The ones where you made the corporate tax cuts and the wealthy folks' tax cuts permanent, but the nickels and the dimes that working people got, had a sunset provision? And then actually we get to pay that back with interest? Oh, thank you so much. And this is where I keep coming back to. It's never been more apparent of which side you should be on than now. To me, it's fairly simple. You've got one guy who's on the side of working people, and it's not the billionaire, real estate tycoon who's had a history of shortchanging contractors and screwing people over. Not that guy, which is quite. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how it is a working person looks at him and go, that guy's got my interest. Other than he's talking about tearing things apart. And I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and I was going, look, at the end of the day, I understand the Republican mindset. I understand, because it's easier to tear things down. It's easy to be angry and destroy things than it is to actually build something. My grandfather said, any idiot with a hammer can tear down a house. You need to be a skilled craftsman to build one. And, I asked this person, I go, if I was paying you $1,000 a house, you either tore one down or you put one up, which would you choose? And he said, well, tear them down because it's easier. Exactly. It's easy to tear things apart. It's easy to rip apart institutions. It's easy to destroy an economy. It's easy to do what Republicans are doing because it plays to the worst of us. It's hard. It's hard to pursue self-actualization. It's hard to be, decent sometimes. Or at least my Republican friends tell me. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Back after this.
With a storm named Daniel and the relentless rains that authorities are describing as a biblical catastrophe.
First Greece, now Libya. Flooding causes widespread death and devastation.
The continent has enough potential to be entirely self-sufficient with the mixture of wind, solar, geothermal, sustainable biomass, and hydropower.
First ever African Climate Summit issues call for global carbon tax on fossil fuels. Plus,
I don't want it to happen when I'm winning up 6-4-1-0. I wanted the momentum to keep going. But hey, if that's what they felt that they needed to do to get their voices heard, I can't really get upset at it.
Climate protests interrupt U.S. Open Tennis Championship.
All of those interruptions and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
So is the government controlling the weather with laser beams?
Yes, they absolutely are, Jesse Waters. And you go tell everyone on Fox News about that right away. You get them. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, another grim weekend of extreme weather around the world, in Libya in particular. What do you got for us today?
Well, first up, we are keeping an eye on Hurricane Lee, which is churning in the record-hot Atlantic Ocean, where it could potentially impact the U.S. Northeast. When Lee hit Category 5 status late last week, it was a new record. For the first time, all 7 tropical cyclone basins have produced a Category 5 storm in the same year, a measure of how human-caused climate change and El Nino have heated ocean waters to record levels.
Or a measure of how dangerous those laser beams are.
The heat in the oceans is also turbocharging astonishing storms. Hong Kong, China was absolutely crippled late last week by the heaviest rain in 140 years of record keeping. 6 inches of rain in 1 hour turned streets into raging rivers and caused widespread infrastructure damage and destruction. In eastern Libya, officials say more than 10,000 people are missing or dead after torrential rains and floods from Mediterranean storm Daniel ripped through the city of Derna and swept away entire neighborhoods. The same storm in Greece inundated nearly 300 square miles of crops and is causing acute water shortages due to contaminated floodwaters. In other news, international climate diplomacy is shifting into high gear. At the first ever Africa Climate Summit late last week, heads of state unanimously adopted the Nairobi Declaration, which calls for a new global carbon tax on fossil fuel pollution, the phasing out of coal, and ending government subsidies for fossil fuels, plus reform of the global financial system to unlock large-scale investment in clean energy. They also called for more financing from wealthy countries that are historically responsible for man-made climate change to help developing countries adapt, because they are now bearing the brunt of climate impacts.
They are indeed. Look at Libya.
At the Group of 20 summit over the weekend, leaders agreed to triple renewable energy capacity globally by 2030 and to boost climate finance and adaptation funding for developing countries. But the G20 statement did not mention cutting emissions, and nations failed to agree to phase out fossil fuels that drive climate change, reportedly due to opposition from Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and India.
What a surprise.
Meanwhile, a first-of-its-kind report by the United Nations finds some progress since the Paris Climate Agreement was reached in 2015, but the report warns the world is not on target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Quote, "The window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all is rapidly closing." The report says governments must move faster to cut pollution and called for the phasing out of fossil fuels, phasing out of the internal combustion engine, and ending $450 billion in annual government subsidies for coal, oil, and natural gas.
Wouldn't need to do it if we just ended all the laser beams.
Finally, climate protesters interrupted the U.S. Open Tennis Championship for about an hour late last week, garnering criticism from some fans who questioned the effectiveness of lumping in potential allies with the fossil fuel industry and those responsible for delaying action. But in a press conference, new U.S. Open champion, 19-year-old Coco Gauff, whose semifinal match was interrupted, says she accepts climate science and sympathizes with their goals.
100%, believe in that. I think there's things that we can do better. The moments like this, are history-defining moments. And like I said, I prefer it not to happen in my match, but I wasn't pissed at, the protesters. I always speak about preaching about what you feel and what you believe in. And it was done in a peaceful way, so I can't get too mad of it.
Good for her. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check Check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, good day in Washington. I know the impeachment stuff, all that ridiculous nonsense, but actually something good. You know, I've got a friend who, longtime friend who was born blind, and he collects, SSI, the Social Security Disability Fund. And it's been helpful, but it's like $700 a month. And I often ask him, how is it that you exist on a mere $700 a month? Now, we're not going to get into all of that, but the reality is we've got people who are struggling just to put food on the table because of a disability. And for me, this is unacceptable. So today you saw the senators, Bill Cassidy, a Republican from Louisiana, and one of my favorite senators, Sherrod Brown from Ohio, along with Representatives Brian Higgins and Brian Fitzpatrick, introduced the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. Going to maybe help people. That's why I've asked Rebecca Vallis to come talk with us. Rebecca is she's a senior fellow and senior advisor to the Disability Economic Justice Collaborative at the Century Foundation, also a host of the fabulous podcast Off Kilter, which I highly, highly suggest. Rebecca, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, it's always good to talk to you, and you're reminding me I got to have you on Off Kilter.
Anytime, I'm always available, always willing. So tell me about this. What is this this SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act? What's this going to do?
Yeah, I have to say it's nice to get to talk with you about good stuff for a change. It's been plenty of times I've been on the show talking to you about bad things that were happening in Washington, and it's nice once in a while to be able to say our elected leaders are actually working together across party lines, trying to do something that's good for workers, and in particular good for some of the workers who have been most left behind by federal policymakers, and that's disabled workers. So the short version, and you mentioned your friend who's getting only $700 a month in SSI benefits, where your friend is one of about 8 million people in this country who are helped by this program, SSI, Supplemental Security Income. It's a little known part of Social Security. It gets a lot less attention than Social Security, but it exists to provide people with income that, as Congress intended it when the program was established back in the 70s, it was supposed to prevent people from living on sub-poverty incomes. Unfortunately, because the program has really been left to wither on the vine for decades, it's literally been forgotten by Congress for decades, it actually ends up trapping a whole bunch of people in poverty when it was intended to offer them a lifeline out of it. The benefits are really low, and we can talk about that another time because that's something that needs some action too. But one of the rules that's part of SSI that just hasn't been adjusted even for inflation in a long time is an asset limit. Literally a savings penalty, a prohibition on having any more than $2,000 in the bank. And that applies to your friend, and that applies to the other 8 million people who are helped by this program. That's a level that was set back in 1984. And spoiler, that's the same year I was born, Rick. So it hasn't been adjusted for inflation literally as long as I've been alive. And that is what this legislation that you mentioned and that we're talking about tonight would do, is it would update SSI's asset limit for inflation for the first time in almost 40 years. Wow. And it's actually really exciting to see bipartisan momentum for doing this, because this is a program that's been left to wither on the vine for so long.
No, you just made me feel really, really old. Because in 1984, talking about myself, especially with this, is I was collecting this as a teenager. My mother passed when I was 13, and when I moved in with my grandparents, they collected. It was a meager sum. I think it was like $250 a month or something like that. But it helped put food on the table. It helped them to take care of me, to get me through, from 13 to 18. And it's one of those things that I've wanted to see strengthened. It's something I share with Paul Ryan Again, somebody who has worked to destroy these programs over the years. So I think it's important to point out when maybe we're going to maybe bump it ahead. What are the chances of this actually getting through?
Well, part of what was exciting today, and I want to be really clear, it wasn't like this bill passed any chamber of Congress. It was an introduction of this legislation, and that's kind of like getting to the starting line. But what it was historic to see both the Senate and the House have bipartisan teams of legislators, and you named them, coming together and saying this is something all of us should agree on. This should not be a right issue, a left issue. This should be something we all say we need to work on. And at that press conference where the senators and the members of Congress were unveiling this legislation, they had a really interesting, strange bedfellows crew of supporters with them. That gives me a lot of hope that this might actually be a bill that actually does move. We saw AARP up there with JP Morgan Chase, up there with Microsoft, up there with the National Association of Evangelicals and the Bipartisan Policy Center. The Chamber of Commerce has even endorsed this legislation. And that makes me feel a little different than your average piece of legislation that has to do with cutting poverty and actually expanding opportunity for people, because instead of it being a bunch of Democrats all flanked by folks who all work at anti-poverty organizations like me, this was a bunch of folks saying, you know what, no matter what walk of life you come from, it should be honestly a no-brainer that the federal government should not be in the business of punishing people for saving money. And we certainly shouldn't be trapping people in poverty because the federal government is telling you you can't have more than $2,000 in the bank. That's not even enough to have emergency savings. That's not even enough to save up for a security deposit to move into an apartment, right? So there's all these different ramifications that were never intended by Congress because, honestly, they set these limits back in 1984, again, the year I was born, and they intended for them to go up. They just forgot to index them to inflation. So that's why you saw members of Congress who honestly don't agree on much else coming together and saying this is something we all need to work on. And you saw the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Ron Wyden, saying, you know what? We need to find any available piece of legislation that's moving through the Senate to attach this to. 70% of Americans across party lines, Republicans, Democrats, independents, everybody in between agree that updating SSI's asset limits is something that we need to do. And frankly, 60% of Americans think there shouldn't be an asset limit in SSI at all. So this is really something everybody can agree on. And when I'm agreeing with people at the American Enterprise Institute, and just like you're saying, you don't agree with Paul Ryan on much, that gives me some hope that this might actually be something Congress wants to do.
So what are they talking to move this limit out? Are they talking about eliminating it, as you've said a moment ago, or is there a number? Because I looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator, and had that $2,000 from 1984 kept up with inflation, it would be about $6,000. It'd be $6,000 today. What are they talking about moving it up to?
So they're actually talking about moving it up to $10,000 for an individual and $20,000 for a couple. Is that everything I would like to see them do? No. I would love to see there be no asset limit in SSI at all, because honestly, we shouldn't be having the federal government in the business of trying to find a needle in a haystack to keep people away from, honestly, as you were saying before, survival benefits, right? $700, which is more than a lot of people get. The average SSI benefit is actually less than that. That's not enough for anyone to live on. And so also trapping people in all kinds of red tape and saying you can't save, you can't get married, you can't get help from a friend. I mean, there's all kinds of rules in SSI that need to be updated. This is just one. But what this bill would do is to update these limits to $10,000 for an individual, $20,000 for a couple. And the fact that we're seeing this level of bipartisan and cross-sector agreement on this issue, I mean, again, the Chamber of Commerce endorsed this bill today, and that's a pretty big deal given that this is a piece of anti-poverty legislation that actually has a cost to it. That gives me some hope that this is a compromise that Congress actually wants to advance.
No, that is a good thing. I mean, we could debate the means testing. I don't know that I want Elon Musk collecting it, but look, because I look at people like my friend. I go back to my grandparents. It was a struggle taking me on, and it was a meager benefit. I was grateful for it, and I'm sure they were too. But it's something that, as a society, I think, as you said, it's hard to make a living, hard to just exist. I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about, a person that I knew who had. They had diabetes young. They went blind. They had transplants. They had all kinds of stuff that went on, and ended up having to live kind of in a halfway house because they couldn't afford to live on their own. And I don't know that that's good either.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the situation. And hey, I'm not going to get into a whole thing about means testing with you right now either. But SSI is also means tested in addition to having this really, really harsh savings penalty. So, in my opinion, everyone always is telling us, right, you got to save responsibly, you got to save for the future. But at the same time, you got the federal government talking out of the other side of its mouth and saying, just kidding, you got to choose between having even basic emergency savings and being able to have survival income and health insurance. And that's a choice nobody should have to make.
Yeah. So how can we help move this along? How can we help make sure that that this gets passed through, and Sherrod and Cassidy, and get this through the Senate, and Higgins and Fitzpatrick get it through the House? I mean, I think the House could be interesting, but how do we help do that?
Yeah, so the number one thing that folks can do, and your listeners are always very, very accustomed to being told to take action, that's one of the reasons I love your show so much, is they can tell their member of Congress that they should support the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. The champions of this bill, as you mentioned, they're looking for co-sponsors. They're looking for other friends in both chambers of Congress to work with them to actually build further support for this bill and to be able to get it to a point where it can actually be attached to some kind of piece of legislation that's going to move. There's not a lot in Washington that is actually moving forward right now. In fact, we're on the brink of a government shutdown and other things because we see so much gridlock and we see so little that left and right are able to agree on. And that's before we get to talking about impeachment and anything else, right? Or Speaker McCarthy, the list goes on. This is one of those rare areas of potential bipartisan cooperation. And again, it's not very often I come on your show and say I'm agreeing with Andrew Biggs over at the American Enterprise Institute, but he just wrote a piece in Forbes saying this is a rare area of bipartisan cooperation to actually do something to help increase opportunity in this country. So
I'm curious, what is it that makes them, what gets them on board? I mean, look, there are moral reasons that I support it. I want to make sure that people can keep food on the table, a roof over their head, have some dignity and respect and all this, because I've seen how people have struggled because of how low these payments are. Why is the American Enterprise Institute, who's generally the ones who are willing to kick somebody out of their wheelchair, as we've seen, here in Harrisburg when they were trying to eliminate a lot of the disability funding, what is it that brings them to this? What is the economic gain there for them then? That's where my mind goes.
It's such a great question. And I think it's because everyone who's now been looking at this, and this is social insurance and economic policy experts across the political spectrum, are looking at this and saying, you know what, this is actually bad economic policy. This is hamstringing people from being able to save, which is something that we know, whether you're on the right or the left or anywhere in between, is actually something that encourages economic stability. When people are able to have savings, we have all kinds of research on this, they're less likely to fall into poverty, right? Because they're able to have that backstop. And so given that saving for the future is one of those key Republican cornerstone talking points, right? Save responsibly. I mean, I got to say it with my Republican voice, right? That is actually a thing that they want people to be able to do. And given that Congress never intended these limits to stay so low, they just forgot to index this to inflation. It's not like, it's not like you're seeing AEI say, let's eliminate these asset limits. They're saying, let's just update them to where they would be for inflation to fix that error that Congress made. And that was what we heard Bill Cassidy say in this press conference today. He said, you know what? It was an oversight on the part of Congress back in 1972 when they established this program. And I should say SSI was signed into law by President Nixon, of all people, right? This isn't some lefty program. This was a bipartisan program from the beginning. But this was before Congress really understood, policymakers really understood the importance of indexing key programs to inflation. That came later. And so as Bill Cassidy said, no lefty, right? Republican from Louisiana. As he said today in this press conference, this is about going back and fixing that oversight from Congress from before. And so we got to update the limits to inflation where they would have been, right? Where Congress legislated back in the 70s and the 80s. And we also need to index these limits to inflation moving forward so that we don't have to come back and fix this problem again. So it really isn't some outrageous idea. It's pretty common sense, and that's why you're seeing so much agreement on it. But I think you're seeing a lot of folks on the right say, let's do this, because they're realizing it's actually getting in the way of economic growth, and it's getting in the way of people like major corporations like JP Morgan Chase and Microsoft, some of the supporters of this bill, hiring disabled people, right? And everyone right now is realizing we have a worker shortage. Everyone's talking about what can we do about that. So I think that's some of why you're seeing groups like them get on board as well.
No, it sounds plausible. And for me, the idea of allowing people to have some savings, especially as we have a Republican House that wants to keep shutting the government down, it's important, especially if you're getting payments from the government, it's important to have a little bit of savings, a little safety net, a little cushion for when they do it the next time. So I'm all on board. I hope folks will contact their representatives and say, hey, get that SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. There's got to be a better name for that. Get that through. But Rebecca, I appreciate the time. Please come back again real soon.
And I'm going to have you on Off Kilter soon, Rick. It's overdue. So I'm going to send you a little link so that it can make it real easy for folks to get involved and contact their representatives. And I'll have you tweet that out to make this nice and easy.
Outstanding. Thank you so much.
We'll talk soon.
Rebecca Vallis, Senior Fellow and Senior Advisor to the Disability Economic Justice Collaborative over at the Century Foundation. TCF.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. Also, make sure you check out her podcast. Fabulous stuff. It's called Off Kilter with Rebecca Vallis. We'll get links out. Quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I got to tell you, when you look at the safety net that we have left in this country, and I'm grateful. I've talked about this before. There have been over the years numerous programs that I benefited from. The Johnson Great Society stuff that helped make sure that we had school lunches. Granted, they weren't great, but they were there. I remember as a kid, going to Purtis Elementary School, in the summertime with all of the other kids and lining up for lunch. There was a lunch program, and for a lot of those kids, it was the only hot meal that they had that day. And one of the things that Reagan and the Republican Revolution came with was destroying those. It's one of the first things that got cut was all of those programs that fed poor kids. And you go, well, that's not true. No, I lived it. I watched it happen. Mr. Ketchup is a vegetable literally took food out of the mouths of the kids that I grew up with. And at every turn, what we've seen is again, Republicans and conservative Democrats. Conservative, we love the children, care about life, pro-life folks, with policies that make it much harder for people who are struggling to make ends meet, and the disabled being part of that. I remember when Tom Corbett was elected governor here in Pennsylvania, and it's one of those moments. There are moments in your life that are just burnt into your brain. And there was a woman from in one of the disability groups who was in a wheelchair. She had all kinds of things going wrong, and she said, "Look, they are trying to cut the meager. It was like $100 a month or something that she got from the state. They're trying to cut what pays for me just to get some bit of food on the table, and they're trying to cut all of these different programs she was talking about." And she said, "Look, if they're going to kill me, they're going to have to watch me do it in public." And I remember thinking, we're the richest country in the world at the richest moment in time. How is this happening? How is this possible? And who puts up with this? And it's one of those reasons that, I look at these programs and go, we need to strengthen them. And I've had people, there are people who cheat the system. Sorry, I'm not buying that. Every person I've known who's got these benefits desperately needed them. And it's infuriating when you hear people, they got something I didn't. Now look, I pay a lot of taxes, and I'm happy to do that. I'm fortunate in that I make a reasonable wage. Got a good union job. I do very well. I'm happy to pay the taxes because I know it's going to benefit people. Because I think of that 10-year-old kid that I once was. And I think about that kid that's growing up in the same place that I grew up in. Do they have the same opportunities? Are they enduring the same struggles? Because look, you wouldn't know it by looking at me, but when I was a kid, the cupboards were always bare. End of the month, food stamps didn't go that far. And I remember going, this isn't how it should be. So when I go back to where we started today, $250 a month for kids over 6, $300 a month for kids under 6. Cut poverty down to 5% for children. We take that away, it has more than doubled. It's almost 2.5 times increase in the poverty level. Almost, 12.5% now? And we're talking about a meager amount of money that made an enormous difference. Because again, I think back to what would have an extra $100 a month meant to my mother in putting food on our table and keeping a roof over our head. What would that meager amount of money have done? What bit of dignity would it have given her? And I guess the reason I get angry about this because it is personal. Because I remember my mother looking at me knowing there's nothing she can do to put food on the table, knowing I was hungry. And before we had kids, and I waited until I was in my mid-30s before we began having a family. That was one of the things that I said, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. I'm never going to look at my children and know that they're hungry and there's nothing I can do about it. And as a society, what is wrong with us that we would be okay with that? What is wrong with all of those people who preach to us about abortion and about being pro-life? What is wrong with these people that they wouldn't demand that every child, everyone, go to bed with a full belly? That's the minimum. I'm not even talking about healthcare and education and opportunity and all the other things that as a parent I want and strive for my kids. The very simple bit of ensuring that people have the ability to put food on their table, which again, for the American Enterprise Institute is a great thing, and for the Chamber of Commerce is a great thing, because eventually that money trickles up, as all money does. It trickles up to the big corporations because you got to buy the food from somewhere. So it seems like a win-win. People get fed, fat cats get fatter. Sounds like a win-win. But no, we're going to make those working people lazy and not desperate enough. Again, back to our CEO who said, you know what, we need mass unemployment. We need misery in the economy so we get those working people back in line. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Make sure you grab the podcast, share it with your friends. I'll highly suggest that. Back after this.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. That was the day that Union Square in New York City was named a National Historic Landmark. Republican Governor George Pataki explained the importance of the park in a press release. It is only fitting that the National Park Service should recognize Union Square Park's long history as a focal point for political expression. New York is proud that the first Labor Day parade took place here in Union Square Park more than 100 years ago, establishing a tradition that spread across the nation. Although the park was very important to the labor movement, that was not why it was known as Union Square. The park got its name because it was the place of intersection or union of two busy New York roads, what are today Broadway and 4th Avenue. In 1831, the open space at the intersection was declared a public space. The space became an important location for labor rallies and political demonstrations. In 1882, the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history marched through the square, 10,000 workers waving their banners high. In 1911, union workers again gathered at Union Square to protest after the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire killed 146, mostly young women and girls, some garment workers as young as 11 and 14 years old. In the later 1920s, the park was demolished for construction of the New York subway, but the space continued to be important to the city's union movement. In 2002, a series of 22 bronze plaques were dedicated at the park to tell the history of Union Square. One of those plaques tells of the first Labor Day parade. Another is a collage of images of labor demonstrations and sheet music of labor songs. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Back to school. Bright-eyed youngsters are now back in our public classrooms, filled with questions about the world around them. Questions like, what happened to our school library? And where did our librarians go? Sadly, these wholly beneficial, caring educators are being dumped in school trash bins by loopy right-wing ideologues who are out to impose their bigotry and ignorance on America. They've been on a rampage of banning books and demonizing teachers, but now the extremists are saying that's not stupid enough. Let's also launch a witch hunt against librarians. This authoritarian assault, funded by a clique of far-right billionaires and coordinated by their front groups, has been popping off across the country. But leave it to Texas Governor Greg Abbott to push it from extreme to totalitarianism. He has unilaterally seized control of Houston's school district, the largest, most diverse in Texas, installing his own whip-cracking dictatorial overseer. Mike Miles, a former Army Ranger and CEO of a corporate school chain, promptly decreed that to improve reading scores in his district, he would first eliminate librarians from 28 schools in Black and Latino neighborhoods and, second, turn their libraries into centers where students who misbehave will be disciplined. Also, Abbott's education czar demands that all teachers there must reapply for their jobs, agree to follow a centrally scripted curriculum, and be monitored by classroom cameras. Of course, elimination of independent educational resources and regimentation of instruction will reduce schools to state institutions for obedience training. This is Jim Hightower saying, and that's the point. The GOP's push to remake education is a billionaire's wet dream of a compliant, subservient workforce. Don't ask questions, just keep pulling that plow.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we're ticking down the days to potential strike with the UAW. Midnight on the 14th is the end of the contract, and I've been told that that's a deadline. That on the 15th they're going on strike, and the news coverage of this has been quite interesting. The idea that Sean Fain is the union boss, they do this all the time. No, he was democratically elected by the members as their representative. He's not the boss. The bosses are the big three. Those are the bosses. These are the workers who create the wealth that the bosses put in their pocket. And you look at the first half of this year, the big three automakers have made a combined $23 billion in profits. Our CEO class, they've put into their pockets what General Motors, $29 million in his pocket last year. Ford CEO, $21 million in his pocket. The CEO of Stellantis, $25 million in his pocket. But no, we can't give those workers who pay their salary, who make the wages to pay their salary, can't help them. And I love the fact that Sean Fain has chosen that 46% increase number, because that's what the CEOs have put in their pocket. And here to share some thoughts on what's happening and maybe what happens on the 15th, I've asked our good friend Frank Hammer to come talk with us. The Hammer is back, retired UAW GM, international representative, and former UAW 909 president. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Greetings. Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
So I want to get to this frame of this. One of these things that tick me off all the time. It's the union bosses. You get a picture of them with a fat cigar sitting in an ivory tower. Like a CEO. This is not who these folks are.
Yeah, they're stuck in the past.
Now
UAW's changed, and they're not wanting to give the union credit for the fact that it's changed, and it's a rank and file from the bottom up type of organization. That's the direction it's taking, and they want to appeal to the public at large as if it was a corrupt union. It's not.
But at the end of the day, this is about workers who create the wealth that these shareholders, that these CEOs are overwhelmingly putting in their own pockets. And for me, this is one of those reasons why I'm a union person. Look, these workers don't deserve a raise. They earn it. They don't deserve better benefits. They earn it by the work that they do and the product that they produce, so that these companies can put this kind of profit in their pockets.
Yeah. So it's extraordinary, and I just want to say you're performing a great service by being a medium through which the rank and file point of view gets out, because the corporate media has really been slamming the UAW for the preposterous demands that they're making. But they never tell the real story about what it's like to be an auto worker these days. And I can tell you from my own experience, I left my plant in 1995, and what the workers are describing today has no commonality with my experience. Workers today are really suffering, and there's so many different ways that that's happened. And we now have a leadership in the UAW saying we don't have to put up with the suffering. We can fight back. And like you said, it ain't a question about deserving. It's a question of what we earned and the value that workers are producing for the corporations.
Now, earlier when I started the program, I talked about a CEO who came out and said, look, we need pain in the economy. We need more unemployment. We need a recession. We need to get those workers back into line because they think that we need them more than they need us. Is that one of these scenarios, you think?
Well, that's certainly the picture that they're painting. And I have to say, corporate class is already out there, for example, Stellantis, threatening that if the workers are demanding what's just, we'll just move our work to Mexico. And that is the kind of leverage that they want to use against workers. We know that they've done it in the past. They threatened Flint. Look at Flint today. A lot of the factory is left Flint. Look at Detroit. And so they hold this threat over our heads, and it really requires a different approach of internationalism. And I believe that Sean Fain and the UAW is moving in that direction.
Now, this is something I've talked about, for decades now, this idea that we do need to work across borders and ensure that jobs, wherever they go, are good paying union jobs, so that these companies can't, run around the globe looking for cheap labor. And we need trade policies that ensure that we don't allow them to go to countries to be able to dump things back into this country, as they were trying in China. But in looking at this moment, if the UAW gets what they want, if what they're asking for, a 46% wage increase, which, it does not seem outrageous when you look at the starting rate is about $17 an hour for an auto worker, and you get a 32-hour work week, which could filter across the economy. what would it cost the big three? What would it cost them in the massive profits that they're getting, or do we not know?
Well, there are calculations. I don't have them at hand, but even at if workers made $32 across the board, it's like collectively together, it's a pittance compared to the profits that they've made, which is like a $250 billion over the last 10 years made by the three companies. So it's a real cheap cry of poverty on the part of the corporations. And really, it's a question: do we want to have a working class in the U.S. that will support the economy? And if so, how do we support the economy? By jobs that pay well and that enable workers to support the economy, which is what we need.
Yeah,
which is what we need. The companies need it too. It's their contradiction.
Yeah, it comes back to my question all the time: is what are you first? Are you a worker first or a consumer first? And I hear people all the time, well, if they get these raises, the price of cars are going to go up. What's it going to cost the economy if they go on strike? And my mind, it doesn't work in that way as much. For me is what happens if they don't go on strike? What happens if they don't in this moment get what they earn? And again, I look at the last several contract negotiations that have been not great. This is just kind of making up for lost ground, not even moving them further ahead of where they should already be, I think.
Yeah, we're in a moment now where we're looking back to 10 years ago and more when we had the bailout, the Wall Street financial crisis, and then the bailout. And the bailout is commonly misunderstood as the companies were temporarily asking us for concessions in order that they could get back on their feet in the wake of losing their market share from 17 million to 10 million cars. And everybody thinks that, well, now that we're on good ground and the companies are back on their feet, well, they're going to just compensate us back for what we lost. Wrong. Their intent was to restructure the industry. The title of the book of the chief of the auto bailout instrument that the Obama administration used was overhaul. They wanted to overhaul the industry, and they used that moment of the crisis to do it. So you're absolutely right. We are only trying to recoup the things that they took away from us. For example, they stopped COLA payments out of the bankruptcy. They stopped having health care for new future retirees in the bailout. They stopped pensions for current workers during the bailout. So these were all things that were used to restructure the relationship between the auto industry and the workers. It was done under both the Republican, Bush, and the Democrat, Obama, along with Joe Biden at his side. And we are now confronted with recouping these losses as a result of that so-called overhaul. So that's where we are now. Yes.
But Frank, I have my Republican friends who tell me that the auto workers got a sweetheart deal. Now, look, I say all the time, it's the first time that a company went through, a bankruptcy where the workers didn't get screwed out of their pensions. But I'm told it was the great sweetheart deal that the auto workers, Obama gave a huge payout to the auto workers. I'm hearing what you're saying is different.
Well, yeah, and of course that's debatable, of course. And their big claim is that the existing current workers at that moment in time did not lose their pensions. And that's a true statement. That's true. That we did not lose our pensions. I retain my pension. The workers at the moment, but future
as you should.
The future, right? But the future workers, they were denied pensions. Currently, a current worker on the shop floor making $16.67 an hour, okay, is looking down the pike to when they retire, and there will be no pension. They get this flimsy 401k. They get no pension. They get no health care. So you can talk about sweetheart deal. Yeah, the current workforce at the time did retain their pensions, but man, it was at a huge cost to the workers that were the new workers that had come into the plants at that point in time.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is where, in fact, I just had a guest earlier who said, the auto jobs are a major driver for the economy because they help create other jobs, and and people want to emulate those jobs. So it sounds like we've got an economy based on jobs that are diminishing, as the auto worker jobs have. And this is an opportunity that I think Sean Fain and the UAW is taking to say, no, look, we want to be that driver of good jobs again. We want to be that driver of family sustaining wage jobs, if I'm getting this right.
Yeah, that's the mission. And what we're confronted with is that in the meantime, the industry is converting to electric vehicles, as you all know.
Right.
And they're looking at that conversion, that transition to the electric vehicles as another way to shave the UAW, as another way to create a new tier, a new lower tier of a workforce. They want to pay like max $21 an hour for workers that are doing the same kind of work that I was doing. And man, when I retired when I left the plant in 1995, I was making $30 an hour. So how is it that here we are 20 years later, and workers that are only supposed to make $20 an hour? Isn't there something called inflation that would have at least kept the workers at the same level as I was in that economy in 1995? Not the case. So that's what we're up against.
It's crazy. So let me ask you this. We're looking at this deadline, which is coming up very quickly on the 14th at midnight. I've been reading some reports that negotiations are happening. There's some movement. Are we hopeful that this can be avoided? Do you expect a strike? Some of the members that I've talked to are geared up and ready to go, much like the UPS workers were when the Teamsters were negotiating. How do you, if you look into your crystal ball, what do you see?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, that in my union career, I have never seen the kind of level of enthusiasm and preparedness that I'm seeing and hearing among fellow auto workers that are currently in the plants. They're ready to strike. They are ready to strike. And I think I don't think that you're going to see any kind of tentative agreement in the next couple of days, because there are a lot of musts in this new agreement, eliminating the entire tier structure. It's not just two tiers, it's multiple tiers, multiple working agreements for different levels of workers. It's so complex. It takes a lawyer to figure it out now. We have the lack of, like I was mentioning earlier, the lack of pensions, the lack of health care for retiring workers under these contracts. All these musts are going to make these negotiations extremely difficult. I don't see them happening before the midnight, September 14th, and I see people walking out and picketing and being, out in front of their factories with their signs. Everybody tier one, et cetera, et cetera. There are too many demands making up for the losses that we've already taken, plus the demands for our future work in the electrified industry, that I don't see the agreement coming out of the September 14th.
Well, we will see how this works itself out. The hope is that, well, let me ask you that. I mean, I was going to say the hope is the Biden administration steps back and let this go. Do you expect anything from the Biden administration? I mean, as I've been saying, I think Joe's is the most pro-labor president of my lifetime. I'm hoping he does what FDR did back during his administration, just said, hey, they'll work it out. Do you expect anything from the administration?
Well, I know that Biden said that, the party should come out with a fair agreement. I have no idea what he intends with that. I think that there's a lot of pressure coming from Wall Street on Biden, and the Biden and the Democratic Party establishment doesn't want to see any dislocations to the U.S. economy. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure coming from the administration for a premature settlement, or for a settlement that doesn't satisfy all of the UAW demands. What I think Biden should be doing is he should be out there campaigning for a raise in the minimum wage. We have not had a raise in the minimum wage in 13 years. Yeah. We're still at $7.25 an hour. And he's got to raise the floor to a new level and let the Republicans fight against the raising the minimum wage. But that's what workers are hurting all over the country, and that's what he can do to contribute to a successful outcome for the UAW strike.
I'm right there with you. That's actually 14 years. Last time it was raised was 2009.
Thank you.
And in my state of Pennsylvania, the last time the state raised it was 2006. So the law here is still 715. So we're even further behind, but we get the federal. But I'm looking forward to seeing how this works out. I am hoping that an agreement is reached. I'm hoping it's everything that the workers earn. But ultimately, if a strike comes, I wish them the best. One day longer, one day stronger. But Frank, I appreciate the time. I hope you'll come back and keep us informed as this continues.
Thank you. I'll be happy to.
Good stuff. Our good friend, Frank Hammer. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of this? Is this something Biden should get involved in? Should he step back and just let them hammer it out? And what if it does trigger some bit of economic pain? Should it matter? And what if they agree to something worse? I'm in the mindset, let them work it out, fight it out, and get the best deal possible. Back after this with your thoughts.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. Socialist and labor leader Eugene V. Debs was sentenced to 10 years in prison for opposing the United States' involvement in World War I. The Espionage and Sedition Act had been passed a year earlier. This made it a criminal offense to interfere with military recruitment efforts. Debs made a speech at a socialist convention in Canton, Ohio, that was considered a violation of this act. He said, "They have always taught and trained you to believe it is your patriotic duty to go to war and have yourself slaughtered at their command. But in all the history of the world, you, the people, have never had a voice in declaring war." Debs also noted, "The master class has always declared the wars, the subject class has always fought the battles." Debs refused to take the stand in his own defense at his trial. He admitted to obstructing the war effort, saying the war did nothing for working people. Debs ran for president as a socialist in 1920 while in jail. Many of his campaign buttons read, "Convict number 9653. During his run, Debs received 1 million votes. Debs was released from the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in 1921. Many agreed with his assertion that the working class have never been the ones to profit from war. In 1935, two-time Medal of Honor recipient and U.S. Marine Corps Major General Smedley Darlington Butler published a book titled War is a Racket, which outlined the excesses of the corporate class over the workers. Many look at the 2003 Iraq invasion by President Bush as another example. Halliburton, a multinational corporation, made nearly $40 billion from its involvement in that war. It's doubtful that any working class people have ever made that kind of profit from war. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind? Email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. So look, again, today's big news, obviously, the impeachment inquiry that's going to happen. Republicans are going to have to show their cards at some point and show that there's nothing going to be there. But as I've said, I think the bigger part of this is the fact that in this moment, Republicans have chose to weaponize impeachment instead of actually do something about poverty numbers. To actually, again, this is the part that's incredibly insane to me. Smart policy, sound investment can make people's lives better. It's that simple, especially when you're talking about the children that my pro-life crowd, I shouldn't say that, my anti-abortion crowd, they seem to be fixated on. They love the babies, but when they become children, the heck with them. They can go to work. We can put them in factories If they're hungry enough, we'll put them to work. Think about where the conservative mindset is taking us. Consider where we're going policy-wise with a Republican-controlled House. What legislation have they brought? Because understand, the things that you do when you're in the majority, when you know that you don't have a chance of passing it, are your priorities. They're your values. They're message bills. What message legislation have Republicans moved on? Well, look, when Democrats were in control of the House and Republicans had the Senate and the White House, and there was no chance of something passing, what did they do? They sought to increase opportunities for health care, for education, for higher minimum wages, for better opportunities to organize. They had legislation. They had priorities. They had great messaging bills to say, hey, working people, get behind this. If you put us into power, if you give us the votes that we need, this is the stuff that we will move. What are Republicans, what sale are they making? What are they telling we, the American voters? What are their priorities? Their priorities are holding the government hostage. We're not going to pay our bills. The government is literally not going to pay its bills. What are their priorities? We're going to impeach Joe Biden for, we don't know what yet, but we'll find out. We'll find something. And look, it's not about, I don't think there'll ever be an impeachment vote. I don't think so. What this is, quite frankly, is a dog and pony show. This is bread and circus. This is just so that they can hold hearings and bring up all kinds of bad things and then blow it out of proportion for their talk radio dominant medium, for their cable news voices, for all of the right media that's out there that's just doing the daily outrage, getting people upset over things that may be accurate, maybe not. But for me, I come back to, all of the entertainment, all of the shenanigans, all of the bread and circus, all of the play. There's still children who go to bed hungry every night. There are still families who are struggling. There are still working people who are getting cheated out of wages. There are still things that aren't being done. And that's what infuriates me. The fact that 5 million kids fell into poverty last year. The fact that because of Republican ideology and policy, we had the largest one-year increase in poverty on record. Let that sink in for a minute. Think about what priorities you have to say, all this other stuff is more important. Attacking our political enemy. More important than feeding those children that we so claim we love. It's crazy to me. Just crazy. But we've got lots of fun and entertainment ahead. With Marjorie Trainwreck Green going to be at the front of this, the Jim Jordans. There's going to be a lot of screaming. There's going to be a lot of outrage. There's going to be a lot of fist pounding. But I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm going to make the prediction, there won't be an impeachment vote. Because I got to think McCarthy knows that if it goes to vote, he's not going to have all of his R's behind him. And if they do get behind him, a lot of them will lose in 24. So this is one of those moments. If you're going to come for the guy, the king of the hill, you're going to come for the guy on top, you better not miss. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Make sure you download the podcast. You can get that at thericksmithshow.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.